Hello everybody, this is Michelle Fox and welcome back to The Simple Quilter. Today I'm going to be talking about using Moda Scrap bags. This is the second episode in my Sew It Up series, and I'm really excited about this because I am pulling out those things in my stash, the newer things that I still really like, and I am using them up. So today's topic is the Moda Scrap bag. So in the comments below, tell me if you have some of these. Tell me how many you have. Tell me what projects you've used to use some of them if you have some of these. I love to hear those things from all of you. But this fabric, the Moda Scrap bags, it just says on the outside, Moda, good to the last swatch. And these are just remnants that are close to the selvages. Now, if you all like to sew with selvages, this is a great source of selvages. But today I'm going to show you how I'm going to make do with what I have here. And I'm going to show you which project I've decided to use so that I can use all of this. Now, I won't be saving the selvages on this because I'm not going to have enough. I want to use the fabric and not the selvages, so I want to make the most of the selvages. So I'm going to only be able to use a few pieces of this. Now, the quilt behind me, this one is one that I made for my daughter Amy, and this I used a honey bun. I think it was called Cheerio or something like that, but this is just using the 10-inch foundation paper that Missouri Star Company used to put out. I'm not sure if they put it out now. They might, but I'm not sure if they still do. But I have a bunch of those squares, so I'm going to use those squares to make this quilt. Something very similar. Hopefully it'll be a little bit bigger because this one's kind of small. I made it for my daughter when she was in high school so she could take it with her to sporting events. I'm going to show you a little bit closer some stuff here on the table. Okay, so here is the scrap bag. And I really am excited because this is Sweetwater fabric. And I love Sweetwater. And I have to tell you, just recently I was talking to my friend Fern, and we were talking about the subscription box put out by Sweetwater. And I almost subscribed to it. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I have this Moda scrap bag with Sweetwater. I just bought, well, right around Christmas time or right after Christmas, I bought some Sweetwater, a Sweetwater Christmas line. And then I have quite a few other little things put out by Sweetwater, some of their panels, and I decided, nope, I'm not going to get it because I'm going to use this. So I really am going to make do with what I have. Now, I want to make the quilt as large as I can. So I'm going to have to add some fabrics from my stash. And I want to show you what I found. These are the dot grunges that, I really like the grunge fabrics too. But I think these are going to look really nice with this collection. I'm going to use, I'm not quite sure about this one, but I think it'll work. And this is going to be my background. It's not white, but it's one of the lightest creams that I have. And I really kind of feel like I need the cream and not the white. You can see this is really, that's really a cream and not a white. So I'm going to go with this. So hopefully with this bit and this bit, I'm going to be able to make a pretty neat looking quilt. And as I told you before, just a minute ago, I think the smallest pieces here are right at 2 inches. Look at that. I'm really doing good to get 2 inches. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to save much of those selvages unless, like this one, I'll be able to save a little bit from those. But there might be a couple that are, yeah, see, I won't be able to use those, but that'll be okay. There's not very many of those. So I am going to try to stretch it by adding these from my stash. Now, I'm going to do the 2-inch strip piecing. Now, my Stars and Stripes quilt, if you can see, these are 2.5-inch squares. The quilt behind me, that was a honey bun, and those are 1.5-inch squares. But I'm going to make this quilt with using the Moda Scrap bag with a 2-inch strip and the 10-inch squares. So you can really do lots of things with these squares, and I really like using those to sew with. Now, I have a video out on how to do the strip piecing, and I'll put a link of that up above. But I'm going to cut these strips and show you and put some together and kind of show you the quilt that I've come up with, so that you'll have an idea of how you can do this with your Moda Scrap bag. Okay, now I'm going to have to video this video in different segments, so you'll probably see me in a different outfit a little bit later, but I wanted to show you what I've come up with before I start sewing into all of it. Okay, so I'll be back after a bit. Okay, so before I start sewing up my strips and getting things ready to show you how to make this quilt, I wanted to show you the fabrics again once I've got them cut into 2-inch strips. Now, all of this over here is from my Moda Scrap bag. Now, as you can see, it's not just a ton, so I really had to supplement with fabric from my stash. And this grunge dot and this grunge dot came from my yardage, and the rest of it, this came from yardage too. But I went ahead and looked in my scrap bins too, so don't forget to check out your scrap bins. But I found this additional black. I didn't have a lot of it, but I had a little bit. I had this red and white check that's going to go just great. I found this denim. It's not just perfect match, but I think it's going to work. This is a scrap quilt, and the whole goal is to use what I have. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then this was some Route 66 fabric, but it just blends right in with all this. So that was a lucky find in my scrap bin. And then, of course, this came from my yardage, and this is going to be the background. So I just wanted to show you what that looks like. Now, I don't know how many squares it's going to make. I can't tell you the amount of yardage you're going to need. But the good thing is this is a scrap quilt, and you can pull from your stash and your scraps to coordinate with what's in your scrap bag. And don't forget, some of your yardage is going to come from your background. And you can even do a scrappy background if you want. You can do a combination of creams or whites. So anyway, I wanted to be sure to show you that because I did get into my scrap bins. I did show you my stash earlier, but these are the pieces I'm going to be using. I'm going to try to use them all up and make as many of the blocks as I can. Okay, so I'm going to get busy sewing this up, and so I can show you the steps you'll need to do to complete these blocks and make this quilt. Okay, so as you can see, I've been busy sewing, and I'm really liking the look of this quilt. It's really similar, almost identical to the one that I showed you up here earlier. They had the brighter colors that belong to my daughter. But anyway, the Sweetwater fabrics are turning out great. But I want to show you now how I did this. Now, I showed you how to do this in my Stars and Stripes video if you'd like to take a look at that. But I'm going to just review this again with you so you can make this little quilt. Okay, so there are a couple things you will need. you're going to need these foundation squares. Now you can cut your own if you have paper that you'd like to use. Now these are older ones. These used to come in 250 per package, and they had this red print on them. But there's those, and then you can buy them now. They're more expensive, and it looks like maybe they're not using the red anymore, and I'll show you why I think they're not using the red in just a little bit. But I do use these, and I got those from Missouri Star Quilt Company. And you will need some fabric glue. Now, you need to go light on the fabric glue. You don't want big clumps of the fabric glue. You're just going to use a little bit of the fabric glue. So let me show you how you get started. Okay, so as you saw, I had all of my strips cut, and then I cut my strips. I kind of pre-cut all my strips, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I want to show you how to get started with this first. Okay, so you're going to find the right side of your fabric. This is the right side of my fabric, and you're going to turn it over to the back side. And you're just going to fold, do a little fold. You're going to fold it in half, and you're going to get a little crease there. And you're going to do the same thing on the other end. These pieces are cut right at 15 inches. And I did not cut much extra on these strips, and this is why. You want a little bit to extend past the point of your paper. Once you sew all this on the paper, this shrinks up a little bit, so it won't be 10 inches when you're finished. So you want, whenever you put a strip down, it has to extend beyond the fabric. Beyond the paper. Okay, and these little creases that we put, we're just going to line those up on the corners just like that. Okay, so I have the wrong side of my fabric, and I'm just going to take my fabric glue and lightly, I'm just putting a little bit, just a little bit of glue onto the fabric. And I'm just going to line these up the best I can. Now, this is not an exact science. This quilt doesn't require you to be exact. And you don't want to stretch it out this way. You just want to pat it. Okay? And that's how you get started. Now, if you have the paper with the red ink on it, I would recommend that you put that face down. This is why you want to put that face down. On one of my blocks, that red ink on this bled through onto this. I've never ever had that happen before, and I've made a couple of quilts, well, several quilts using this technique, but it bled through. It bled through on here. I don't know if it's because my iron had dripped some water out of it, and there was a little puddle on my ironing board. That could have caused it. I'm not sure, but I would put that face down. After that happened, I put it face down on all of them. Okay, then I told you I cut my strips into the sizes that I needed. And the next strip, you're just going to lay down. These strips are 13 inches, and you can go 13 and a half on this. This is actually a little bit longer than that. But, so your first strip is 15. Your next ones are 13 and a half, or even 14 if you want. You're not going to be wasting just a ton of fabric, but you will waste a little bit. Okay, so I have right sides together. And I'm going to sew right down along here a scant 1/4 of an inch. Now, you have to be sure you're doing a scant 1/4 of an inch, because I'm using 2-inch strips. If you're using larger than 2-inch strips, then you don't have to worry so much. But this, if I do a scant 1/4 of an inch, it comes right out and covers this point just a little bit. If you take more than a scant 1/4 of an inch, you're going to have a tiny little piece that shows there, and that you can't have that. You've got to be able to cover the paper with a little bit extending over. So that's an important tip. All right, now another tip, I'm going to be including a lot of tips in this video, so you might want to jot these down. Another tip is that you need to use a blue jean needle when you sew. The reason for that is because it creates a little bit larger hole, and it helps you be able to tear these off a little bit easier. And you want to decrease your stitch length. I decrease my stitch length to 1.5. It's a tiny little stitch, but these things just tear off super easy when it comes time to do that. So you're going to sew this on, press it, fold it back, and then press it. And you're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Put it on there, sew it, press it back, just like that. And you're going to keep doing that until you have the entire block covered like this. Okay, now I'm going to show you some tips on pressing. Okay, now here's a super important thing when you get ready to press these, and you're going to want to press these, and you're going to want to press them good so that they're going to lay nice and flat and extend clear out to the end and cover that little piece. First thing you want to do is you want to take and put the steam down, turn the steam off. And you're not going to want to use your best press or any type of starch when you're using these papers. And you can see in this one, this was before I realized what was happening with the red ink, but you want to put that face down. Okay? Now, what you're going to do, or this is how I do it. You're just going to press it, set the seam, then you're just going to finger press this back just a little bit. Okay? Then you're going to take your iron, and you're going to press that. And you're going to press it really good. Now notice I'm not doing this on the piece. I'm just moving it over slightly and leaving it. Slightly and leaving it. Then this is where you're going to want to use your clappers. And that helps get that super nice and flat. But this part is really important. You want to be sure to get it as flat as you can so that when you're done, all these extend beyond your paper. Beyond your paper just a tad. And you just want it to lay nice and flat. Okay, so again, no steam, no starch, no water. Press it flat, set the seam, press it, and use your clappers. Okay. Now when you cut your strips, you're going to probably want to jot this down if you're using a 2-inch strip. This first piece is 15 inches long. This second piece is 13. Now you can cut it a little bit larger if you'd like, maybe 13.5 if you'd like. The next pieces are 10, or you can do 10.5. The next pieces I would do 7.5, and the next piece I would do 4.5. And the reason I say that is because when you trim, you want to come out to the edges, and you don't want to be cutting off little points of your fabric. You want to be sure everything's cut nice and flat. Now when you go to sew, you need to stack up all your pieces. So what I do is I glue a bunch of pieces on, stack them up. Stack a lot of them. I was able to get 20 blocks with the scraps that I had and the Moda Scrap bag. And again, these are 2-inch strips. Now if your strips are bigger, you're probably not going to need quite as, well, you'll still need 20 blocks if you want to do 4x5 like what I did. Okay, so I just stacked them up. I laid out my stacks of fabric, and I chain pieced all of those together. And here's a picture showing you how I had it all laid out before I started sewing. Okay, so then after you have it all sewn up and your block is pressed, you're going to need to trim these to 10 inches. Now your papers, remember, are shrinking up a little bit, so you don't want to go just by the papers. You want to go by your ruler. Okay, you can see it short about 1/8 of an inch right there, but I'm right there on the point right there, so I've got to move it down just a little bit because I want to be sure to have that point there on the fabric. Okay. I may actually have to go down just a tad more. Okay. And you're just going up and over. Up and over. Okay. And then there you have it. Now you want to make sure you don't have any gaps here. There's a tiny bit of a gap right there, but it's small enough that my seam will catch that. Alright. Okay, so once you have your blocks sewn together, then you're just gently, very gently, you're going to remove all this paper. So because you've used a smaller stitch size and that bigger needle, these will just be peeling right off. Alright, and you just have to tear all those off. Then when you get finished, I always do 1/8 of a stay stitch all the way around. And the reason I do that is because these angles, that's the bias, and that's where the quilt will stretch. That's where the fabric's most stretchy. So I do a little stay stitch all the way around. Okay, so I wanted to show you a couple of options for the sashings. Now I cut my strips 2 inches, so my sashing pieces I'm going to cut 2 inches. And I'm just going to go with the squares on this one. But you could go with a little star. In fact, I had considered a little star on this quilt since it is a patriotic fabric line, but I don't think I'm going to do that. But I want to just tell you how you create this star. Okay, so if your sashing piece is, these were 2.5 inch sashing pieces. So what you want to do, cut 2 squares. Now, if this is 2.5, you take half of that, which is 1 1/4 inch, and you add 1/2 inch. So your squares here will be 1 1/2 inch squares. And you just put them on there and snowball them right there onto that. Now, this is explained in my Stars and Stripes video, and I'll put a link above that if you need to see specifically how to do that and can't just do that with my verbal instructions. Now, this one, with the quilt behind me, I'm not going to add the stars. I'm just doing the plain square cornerstones. But on the quilt behind me, these strips are 2 inches. So you take 2, divide it by 1/2, which is 1, and then you add 1/4 of an inch to that measurement, and that gives you the size of the little square you need to make the point. So if you want to make the point, you do 1 1/2, you're going to need to do a 1 1/4 inch square. Sew it on there diagonally, trim it, flip it back, and then sew on your other square. And again, that's shown in my Stars and Stripes video, and I'll put a link up above and in the description below. Now here's a little bit closer picture of the quilt. I will put 2 borders on and a binding just to enlarge the size. This quilt will be 4 blocks by 5, which is a total of 20 blocks. I don't know the dimensions quite yet. I didn't really do all the calculations for that yet. But this is a little bit bigger than the quilt that I made for my daughter. Now this string quilt, this pattern has been out there for, people have been doing string quilts for generations. So that's really all this is. But I do like using those 10-inch foundation pieces that Missouri Star Quilt Company puts out. It's a great product, and I have quite a few of them so that I can make more quilts like this in the future. This is kind of one of my go-to quilts. It's quick and easy. It took me about 1 hour to get 5 blocks completely made and trimmed up. Now, some of you will be able to do that quicker than me, and some of you it will take a little bit longer, but that's just to kind of give you a rough idea of how long it takes to make this quilt. Really, again, it's pretty quick and easy. It's a nice scrap buster, but it really helped me use up that Moda Scrap bag. So now I'm just down to 1 Moda Scrap bag left in my stash, and I hope to have a video on that soon. So don't forget to tell me if you have Moda Scrap bags, how many you have, if you've used them, what pattern you used for them. Please put that in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. Please share with a friend, and as always, leave a comment. I love to get those comments, and I do try to reply to each and every one. So until next time, have fun quilting.